The sweltering July afternoon at Riverside Zoological Park was thick with the usual symphony of a bustling zoo, the excited chatter of children, the occasional squawk of exotic birds, and the distant, low growl of a big cat. For Mark, a zookeeper whose life had been intertwined with the park's inhabitants for 2 decades, it was a familiar, comforting rhythm. He moved with the practiced ease of someone who knew every scent. The sweet, sticky tang of melted cotton candy, the rich earthiness of the elephant enclosure, and the distinct, musky aroma that clung to the air around the primate exhibit. His clipboard, worn smooth from years of daily checks, rested comfortably in his hand as he approached Kito's habitat. Kito, the magnificent silverback gorilla, was usually the picture of serene power. Today, however, a subtle agitation rippled through him. He paced the edges of his vast enclosure, a newly designed space that mimicked his natural habitat with lush foliage and towering rock formations. The most striking feature, and ironically the most unsettling to Mark, was the deep, wide moated trench that separated the gorillas from the viewing area. It was an aesthetic marvel designed to give visitors an unobstructed view, but its depth and the sheer volume of recycled rainwater it held made Mark uneasy. He'd seen Kito eye it warily on numerous occasions, a primal instinct overriding the artificial comfort of his surroundings. A small crowd had gathered, drawn by Kito's unusual restlessness. Mark felt a familiar tightening in his chest. He'd learned to read the subtle cues of his charges, and Kito's current behavior screamed distress. The air seemed to hum with anticipation, a strange tension building. Suddenly, the quiet murmurs of the crowd were ripped apart by a thunderous roar from Kito. It wasn't an aggressive sound, but one born of pure, unadulterated panic. With a desperate, misjudged lunge, his enormous, powerful body, weighing over 400 pounds, launched towards the far side of the enclosure. The impact with the water was a sickening, guttural splash that echoed through the park, silencing all other sounds. A collective gasp swept through the crowd, instantly followed by piercing screams of terror. Kito, clearly disoriented and terrified, thrashed wildly in the deep water. Gorillas, for all their immense strength and formidable presence on land, are not natural swimmers. His massive arms flailed in a desperate, uncoordinated struggle, his powerful head dipping below the surface for agonizing seconds before re-emerging, gasping for air. Mark's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of his fear. He knew the strict zoo protocol. Under no circumstances was staff to enter an enclosure with an animal as dangerous and powerful as Kito without a fully equipped tranquilizer team and extensive backup. Safety was paramount, always. But watching Kito fight for his life, witnessing the raw, primal terror in his intelligent eyes, something inside Mark fractured. He scanned the scene frantically. Other zookeepers were running towards the exhibit, their faces contorted with horror and helplessness, but they were still too far. The emergency response team, with tranquilizer darts and nets, would take precious minutes to arrive, minutes that Kito clearly didn't have. The harsh July sun beat down relentlessly, its reflection shimmering off the churning water, making Kito's desperate struggle even more agonizingly vivid. The air grew thick with unspoken dread, a suffocating blanket of helplessness. Don't let this story end here. If you're on the edge of your seat, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next thrilling chapter of Kito's rescue. Remember, this is a fictional dramatization. The immediate aftermath of Kito's plunge was a maelstrom of human emotion. Panic escalated rapidly among the onlookers. Some, morbidly fascinated, continued to film the unfolding tragedy on their phones, their screens reflecting Kito's desperate struggle. Others wept openly, their hands clasped over their mouths in horror. A few brave, albeit naive souls shouted futile advice and encouragement from beyond the safety barrier. Mark, however, had retreated into a singular focus, his senses narrowed to just one thing: Kito. His gaze was fixed solely on the struggling silverback, whose powerful movements were now becoming weaker, more sporadic, a dark, inert mass slowly succumbing to the unforgiving water. He was sinking. Mark's mind raced, a chaotic blur of replayed images and ingrained directives. Every safety briefing he'd ever attended, every cautionary tale shared amongst veteran zookeepers, flashed before his eyes. The rules were unequivocally clear, etched into the very foundation of his profession. Do not endanger yourself. A gorilla in distress, especially a silverback of Kito's immense size and power, was an unpredictable force of nature. One panicked swipe, one reflexive grasp, and Mark knew with chilling certainty that he could be severely injured, perhaps even killed. His career, his livelihood, his very life hung in the balance. But then a more profound, more visceral question surfaced, overriding all practical considerations. What if doing nothing was the greater danger? What if inaction, standing by and watching this magnificent creature drown, was a form of violence far more destructive than any physical risk he might face? He had dedicated his entire adult life to these animals, to ensuring their well-being, their survival. He had witnessed Kito grow from a boisterous, playful juvenile into the formidable, respected leader of his troop. There was a bond there, an unspoken understanding forged over years of shared space, quiet observation, and mutual, albeit distinct, respect. He saw not just an animal in peril, but a complex, intelligent being facing imminent death. The image of Kito's terror-stricken eyes, wide and pleading, burned itself into his memory, a silent demand for action. A voice, surprisingly calm amidst the escalating chaos, cut through his tormented thoughts. Someone has to do something. It was Sarah, a young, earnest intern who frequently assisted Mark with the primates. Her face was pale, reflecting the collective fear, but her eyes held a fierce, unwavering determination that mirrored his own burgeoning resolve. Mark glanced at her for a fleeting second, a silent acknowledgement of their shared anguish, then back at Kito. The decision, though terrifying in its implications, now felt almost inevitable, a path he was compelled to take. He simply could not stand by and watch. He couldn't live with himself if he did. Taking a deep, shaky breath, Mark began to shed his uniform shirt, the heavy fabric feeling suddenly constricting. He kicked off his sturdy, well-worn boots. The few zookeepers who had finally arrived at the scene began yelling, their voices a cacophony of fear and disbelief. "Mark, no, don't! It's too dangerous." Their words were laced with a desperate mixture of professional caution and genuine concern for his safety. But Mark was already moving. He climbed over the low concrete barrier, the rough surface scraping painfully against his hands, but he barely registered it. The air, thick with the heat and humidity of the July afternoon just moments before, now felt strangely cool and invigorating against his skin as he approached the churning water's edge. He knew this was an act of profound insubordination, a career-ending move, perhaps even a life-ending one. But for Kito, for the silent bond they shared, for the unspoken plea in those desperate eyes, he had to try. He had to do the unimaginable. The tension is palpable. What will happen to Mark and Kito? Don't miss a moment of this gripping tale. Hit subscribe and join our community for the thrilling conclusion. This is a fictional dramatization. The water of the moat, surprisingly cold, swallowed Mark as he plunged in, a sharp, shocking contrast to the scorching July air that had baked the concrete walkways. He swam with powerful, desperate strokes towards Kito, who was now barely moving, a dark, immense mass of fur and muscle, inert and terrifyingly still in the water. As Mark closed the distance, the sheer, overwhelming size of the gorilla became acutely apparent. Kito's eyes, wide with a profound, primitive fear, locked onto Mark's. There was no aggression, no threat, only a deep, silent plea for help that transcended species. Mark knew that a direct, head-on approach would be suicidal. He had to reach Kito carefully, from behind, to avoid any reflexive lashing out from the panicked animal. He reached the gorilla's massive back, feeling the coarse, wet fur beneath his hands, surprisingly soft in places despite its density. Kito was impossibly heavy, a dead weight in the water, but a surge of raw adrenaline coursed through Mark's veins, igniting every fiber of his being. He looped his arms under Kito's powerful shoulders, struggling to find purchase on the slippery, wet fur. He pushed, heaved, and pulled with every ounce of strength he possessed, trying desperately to maneuver Kito towards the shallower edge of the moat, where the concrete slope was less severe and offered a chance of escape. It was a truly Herculean effort. Mark's muscles screamed in protest, burning with the strain. His lungs ached for air, and the water seemed to resist his every movement, pulling him down. He could hear the frantic shouts from the zookeepers and the crowd on the bank. A chaotic mix of frantic encouragement and panicked warnings, their voices a muffled din through the water. He focused only on Kito, on the ragged rhythm of his own strained breathing, and on the desperate, all-consuming need to get the gorilla to safety. Slowly, agonizingly, inch by excruciating inch, he began to make progress. Kito, perhaps sensing the selfless intent, seemed to instinctively cooperate, his large body moving with less resistance, almost aiding Mark in the desperate struggle. Finally, after what felt like an eternity suspended between life and death, Mark managed to push and guide Kito close enough to the bank for the other zookeepers to reach them. Hands reached out, strong and determined. They threw heavy, knotted ropes, and together, with a combined monumental effort, they managed to pull Kito, heavy and dripping, onto the safety of dry land. Kito lay panting for a long moment, his chest heaving, then slowly, majestically pushed himself up, his dark, intelligent eyes still fixed on Mark. He let out a low, guttural rumble, a sound that transcended language, a profound expression of gratitude that Mark understood deep in his soul. It was a connection forged in the crucible of near tragedy that would bind them forever. Mark, utterly exhausted and trembling, pulled himself out of the icy water, his body aching, his mind reeling. He was immediately surrounded by his colleagues, their faces a complex mosaic of overwhelming relief, stern admonishment, and quiet awe. The emergency response team, their sirens wailing mournfully in the distance, had just arrived, but the immediate crisis was over. Mark knew with absolute certainty that there would be severe consequences for his actions, a likely reprimand, perhaps even suspension, or worse, outright dismissal from the job he loved. But as he looked at Kito, who was now sitting calmly, watching him with an almost human understanding, he knew he had made the only choice he could. The bond between them, tested in the terrifying depths of the moat, was now stronger than ever, a living testament to an impossible rescue and an unimaginable act of courage. Thank you for watching this powerful story of courage and connection. If you were moved by Mark's selfless act and Kito's miraculous survival, please make sure to subscribe to our channel for more compelling narratives that explore the extraordinary bonds between humans and animals. Remember, this story is a fictional dramatization,